It was my 18th birthday. Everyone else was celebrating. Balloons, cake, laughter, the works, but not my father. He didn't smile. He didn't cheer. He looked at me across the table, glass in hand, eyes cold. "I wish you were never born," he said. The words hung in the air. Sharp, cruel, permanent. I froze. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run. I wanted to disappear. But instead, I stayed silent. My name is Ethan Miller. Clean-shaven, late teens, and up to that moment completely underestimated. My father, Richard Miller, had always been blunt, domineering, and cruel in subtle ways. But nothing prepared me for this. The room went quiet. Guests glanced awkwardly. My mother's face turned pale. My sister, Rachel, smiled faintly. She always thrived on my humiliation. I forced a smile, nodded politely, and excused myself to the balcony. Outside, the night was calm. Cold air, city lights in the distance. I took a deep breath. Anger surged. Shame burned. Pain, yes. But beneath it, something new began to grow. Pilan. If my father thought words could break me, he was wrong. I would leave. I would survive. And one day, he would regret every word. The next 12 years changed everything. I didn't beg for attention. I didn't fight back with words. I built a life that even he couldn't ignore. From nothing, I studied finance, law, and business strategy. I worked 2 jobs while going to night school. Every insult, every cold word, every birthday ignored became fuel. By the time I was 30, I wasn't just Ethan Miller, the son he dismissed. I was a man who owned his destiny. Clean-shaven, confident, commanding. A presence that could move markets, manipulate corporate structures, and expose secrets. And then came the letter. A simple envelope, marked, "From Richard Miller." Inside, no apology, no explanation. Just 4 words. "We need to talk." I smiled slightly, the same calm, controlled smile I had when I realized that 12 years of silent preparation had led me to this exact moment. Because now, my father didn't know it yet, but the boy he wished never existed had returned. The next morning, my father didn't know where to start. The letter I sent him was simple, factual, and impossible to ignore. No accusation, no anger. Just the undeniable proof of what I had become and how far ahead I was. "Ethan," he murmured when he called. His voice was smaller than I remembered, shaken, hesitant. "Dad," I replied calmly. "I assume you've read the details." A pause, then a deep sigh. "Yes, I did. And I don't know what to say." That's when the first crack appeared. Across town, Rachel's phone buzzed incessantly. Messages, emails, notifications, friends, colleagues, even distant relatives, all pointing to the inevitable. Ethan Miller's rise was no longer a secret. She had always thrived on control, always played the perfect daughter, always smiled, while I silently struggled. But now, control was gone. I had built a reputation while they lived comfortably in denial. Every corporate internship, every investment, every calculated move was a silent strike. And now, it was paying off. My father paced his study. "This can't be true," he whispered. But every verification I provided the corporate accounts, my growing network, my independent investments proved otherwise. He had raised me, but never prepared himself for this moment. And I had waited. "Ethan, we, Rachel," he stumbled. I let him falter, because silence speaks louder than any words I could say. Rachel, on the other hand, was frantic. She paced the house, mumbling excuses to herself. Every text from a colleague confirming my rising influence made her pale. Every friend who remembered my early struggles now sent me congratulations or queries about investment advice. She realized, finally, that the ignored and humiliated Ethan Miller had become someone she could no longer manipulate. The next step was subtle. I didn't rush in. I didn't call. I waited for the inevitable confrontation. Because when someone has underestimated you for years, the reveal is far more powerful when it hits naturally. By the evening, My father requested a private meeting. He wanted answers. He wanted guidance. He wanted control. I arrived at his office, not as a son seeking forgiveness, but as a man returning to claim what he had always deserved: respect. He stood up when I entered, taller, older, weaker in resolve. "Ethan, he began, but I interrupted. "Sit down, Dad. Let's discuss this calmly." And for the first time in 12 years, he listened, because he realized the boy he wished never existed had returned. Not for apology, not for anger, but for truth. The tension in the Miller house was palpable. I arrived at the family estate not as the timid teenager who once left with nothing, but as Ethan Miller, confident, composed, untouchable. My father, Richard, met me in the study. His hands trembled slightly, the weight of 12 years of regret pressing down on him. This can't be true," he muttered, looking at the documents I'd provided. Corporate reports, verification of my financial growth, and proof of Rachel's sabotage. "I've checked everything," I said calmly. "Every detail is accurate. Every record verified." Rachel was in the room, sitting stiffly. Her confident smile from years past was gone. Her eyes darted nervously between us. The perfect daughter who once relished my humiliation now looked small, powerless, exposed. My father held the documents, struggling to comprehend the evidence. "Rachel, explain this," he demanded, his voice heavier than I'd ever heard. Her mouth opened, then closed. She tried to force a laugh. "It's probably a mistake. Records can be wrong," she said, her voice cracking. But her words had no power. The security footage, corporate reports, and letters all screamed the truth louder than her lies. My father's eyes narrowed. He realized, painfully, that for 12 years, he had ignored reality. He had allowed Rachel to control the narrative, to destroy my life. "You let this happen," I said softly, breaking the silence. "You let me walk out at 18 with nothing, believing I was unworthy. You chose her lies over me." My words weren't angry. They weren't dramatic. They were truth delivered calmly, and that made them sting. Rachel swallowed hard. I didn't think it would go this far," she whispered, tears rolling down her face. Her first moment of real fear. For the first time, she realized that her manipulations had consequences she could no longer control. My father sank into his chair. The weight of 12 years crashed down on him. I was wrong," he admitted. I leaned back, my gaze steady. "Yes, you were. And now it's your choice how this ends." That night, the news of my verified success began to leak quietly through the corporate world. Friends, colleagues, and media sources noticed the meteoric rise of Ethan Miller, the same boy they once dismissed. Rachel's panic grew, her influence crumbled. Every contact she relied on now questioned her integrity. She realized that my silence and careful preparation had dismantled her power without a single public confrontation. Meanwhile, my father reached out to me the next day. "Ethan, I read your letter. I don't know what to do," he said, voice small, humbled. I let the silence stretch, because silence is more powerful than words. Finally, I responded, "I know. And that's why you're here." He paused, absorbing my calm. He had expected anger. He had expected revenge. But the man he once threw out had evolved. Control, strategy, and patience. My silent allies had positioned me above them all. "I will help you," I said carefully. "But only if you follow my instructions to the letter. No deviations, no excuses." Richard exhaled slowly, realizing for the first time the boy he wished never existed was now the one who would decide their fate. The next morning, my father received the envelope I had prepared. Not emotional, not pleading. Structured, legal, precise. Inside, terms of engagement. Miller family resolution. Condition 1. Public acknowledgement. Richard and Rachel must publicly admit that I, Ethan Miller, was wrongfully accused, abandoned at 18, and that Rachel's actions caused this injustice. The moment this hit the internet, there was no hiding. Condition 2. Legal accountability. Rachel must sign a confession admitting falsification of documents and manipulation related to my life. No excuses. No delays. Legal and binding. Condition 3. Financial separation. All family assets, trusts, and accounts tied to my name must be transferred without obstruction. Power shifted. Control no longer rested with them. Condition 4. Final clause. Once all conditions are met, I alone will decide if I intervene in the ongoing corporate investigation against the family's business. My father sat frozen. I can't, he whispered. Yes, I replied. You must, or lose everything anyway. Rachel realized the full weight of her actions. Her confident smirk from years ago had vanished. Now she was pale, anxious, exposed. The empire she thought untouchable was beginning to crumble. 3 days later, the public statement went live. Richard Miller. 12 years ago, I made a grievous mistake. I removed Ethan Miller from our home based on false claims. Rachel Miller admits to falsifying the story. The story spread instantly. Corporate boards panicked. Media outlets picked it up. The Miller family name, once respected, became a public scandal. Rachel's legal confession followed. The investigation escalated. Partners withdrew. Stock plummeted. Public trust vanished. Through all of this, I stayed silent. I watched, calculated, and waited, because my goal was never simple revenge. It was truth and justice delivered with precision. 1 week later, all conditions were complete. Documents signed, assets transferred, confessions submitted. My father called. It's done. Yes, I replied. Pause. Will you help us now? He asked, hesitant. I leaned back, looking over the skyline of the city I had built. I'll review the corporate case, I said, and I'll decide what's worth saving. Because now, power was no longer emotional. It was strategic, earned, controlled. The Miller family no longer controlled my life. I controlled theirs. 12 years had passed since that night. The night my father said, I wish you were never born. Now, I walked back into the house, not as the boy he threw out, but as Ethan Miller, confident, controlled, untouchable. My father met me at the door, older, worn by regret, eyes heavy with the weight of 12 wasted years. You came, he said, voice smaller than I remembered. I nodded. Yes, it's time we end this. Inside, Rachel sat rigidly, her smirk gone, her eyes wide with fear and disbelief. The girl who had once destroyed my life, now powerless. Ethan, I'm sorry, she said immediately. No delay, no manipulation, just desperation. I looked at her calmly. I didn't come for apologies, I said. We sat at the same dining table where my childhood ended 12 years ago. 3 people, 1 broken family, 1 truth that had waited years to be revealed. My father. I read your terms. I accepted them. I did everything you asked, Richard said. I know, I replied. I've verified everything, Rachel whispered. I signed the confession. I told them everything. I nodded. That was the right choice. Silence filled the room, not heavy with lies this time, but heavy with consequences. My father admitted, voice breaking. I can't change the past. I can't undo that night. I held his gaze. Regret doesn't rewrite history, I said. He flinched slightly. Truth had landed. Rachel's tears fell freely. I'll accept whatever happens to me. Legal consequences, public shame, everything, she whispered. I looked at her steadily. The sister who once humiliated me, the person who tried to destroy my life. I realized anger no longer gave me power. Letting go did. I will help with the corporate investigation, I said. Both looked up. Hope mixed with disbelief, but not for you. I do it for integrity, to protect what I built. To you, Rachel, you face your consequences fully. I won't interfere, I continued. She nodded slowly, understanding at last. Then came the final moment. I stood. They both watched, waiting. I don't hate you, I said. Their eyes widened. They expected fury. Instead, I gave them freedom from me. I just don't need you anymore. The words were soft, but they hit harder than any scream could have. My father's shoulders slumped. He understood that forgiveness doesn't always mean reunion. Rachel covered her mouth, crying silently. Some damage cannot be repaired, only accepted. I walked toward the door, the same door I was forced out of 12 years ago. But this time, I was leaving on my terms. Outside, the air was clean, calm, and free. 12 years ago, I left with nothing. Now, I walked away with everything I built. My name, my success, my identity, my peace, and most importantly, the truth. Because revenge isn't always about destroying others. Sometimes, it's about becoming so strong that their betrayal no longer controls you. I am Ethan Miller, and this was the last chapter of a past that tried to define me.